Good morning, good afternoon once again, and good evening wherever you are joining us from today. We welcome you to the e-launch of the Access to Finance Framework for Women, which was developed recently in conjunction with stakeholders. Today is an epoch-making event, and we are here all to launch this Access to Finance Framework. And so I welcome you all on behalf of the stakeholders of the financial inclusion landscape, on behalf of the Central Bank of Nigeria and every other stakeholder. You are very welcome to this event. I would therefore like to commence this event by inviting the Director of the Development Finance Department of the Central Bank of Nigeria, in the name of Mr. Philip Yusuf Yila, to kick off this event, to give us, opening remarks for this event. Mr. Yila, Director, please.
Okay, thank you very much, and good morning to all the participants. I've been given, a speech to read. I'll just briefly just read out some comments. So, good morning. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the e-launch of this framework for advancing women's financial inclusion in Nigeria. This grand event indeed marks a huge step towards the actualization of gender economic inclusiveness in the country. I would like to express the appreciation of the Central Bank of Nigeria to all the stakeholders that supported the development of this framework, particularly EFINA. EFINA, we've been working with them for a very long time, Women's World Banking, and members of the National Financial Inclusion Special Intervention Working Group. Women make up half of the global population and have the potential to greatly enhance economic growth with greater participation and opportunities. Worldwide experience shows clearly that supporting a stronger role for women contributes to poverty reduction, economic growth, and sustainable development. Development finance, we've been giving out a lot of loans recently, AXMAs, the Targeted Credit Facility, and throughout my time here, I've looked at the data. Women are the ones that have a better paying record. According to the Power of Parity report by McKinsey, the economic consequence of pursuing gender equality includes a potential addition of $28 trillion to global annual GDP by 2025. The Sustainable Development Goal also sets gender equality at its fifth goal with a target to undertake reforms for equal access to economic resources for women, including financial services, ownership of property, and natural resources. While gender inequalities persist in access to education, employment, healthcare, and political representation, the framework for advancing women's financial inclusion in Nigeria focuses on closing the gender gap with regards to access to formal financial products and services. And the financial inclusion team has been doing a good job at trying to close this gap. According to the 2018 EFINA Access to Financial Services Survey, 40.9% adult women were excluded from formal financial services in Nigeria, when compared to 32.5% for men, implying a financial inclusion gender gap of 8.4%, which is quite significant for a population of over 200 million people. This gap gets even wider in the rural areas, with only 24% of women registered as formal account owners compared to 54% of men. Although the women's financial inclusion statistics improved from 51% in 2010 to 40.9% in 2018, the gender gap still ranges around 8% between the timelines. The situation is further exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic, which threatens to reverse the progress made in women's financial inclusion. There are already indications that women are disproportionately affected by the pandemic. The informal sector, where women make up 60% of global employee index, are worse hit, and women-owned enterprises are more adversely affected. The framework, which is timely, seeks to address the identified barriers to driving uptake of financial products and services by women. These barriers include low income, lack of trust in financial services providers, lack of access to appropriate identification to interact with financial products and services, low literacy levels, especially from where I come from in the Northeast, inadequate number of gender-centric products, amongst others. Furthermore, it aims to provide financial inclusion stakeholders with a blueprint for driving sustainable access to and usage of financial services in Nigeria, allowing for the creation of a globally recognized, increasingly inclusive financial sector that will have closed the gender gap by 2024. Embedded within its core are 8 strategic imperatives to provide recommendations to implementing institutions to drive improved financial and digital literacy, mandate the collection of gender disaggregated data collection to inform policy decisions, expand delivery channels to allow financial products and services to reach women closer to their homes, promote the expansion of digital financial services and fintech solutions for women, amongst others. Of special interest to us in the Development Finance Department is the role that women can play in ensuring food security in Nigeria. It's something that is very, very passionate to the team, especially the Anko Bora's team in the department. While studies show that female farmers are more likely to reinvest income from their agro businesses back into families to improve their families' education, nutrition, and health, there remains a significant amount of untapped potential and opportunities in the agricultural sector where more women can participate across the entire value chain. We will continue to improve our efforts at including more women in the agricultural value chain and close the gender gap in agricultural financing in the country. So if it means that we have to have specific products targeted at women, as a development finance team, we will recommend that to management to see how we can close that gap. Lastly, I would like to urge all participants at this launch to actively commit to the implementation of the framework for advancing women's financial inclusion in Nigeria in order to contribute to the inclusive and sustainable growth of the economy. Thank you for listening, and I ask that we have a pleasant session. Thank you. Moderator?
Director, you are to introduce the next speaker.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much, moderator. I would like to introduce the Deputy Governor, FSS at the Central Bank of Nigeria, Mrs. Aisha Ahmad. She has been very passionate around, the advancement of women's rights, especially financial inclusion. I talked about agric. She's constantly being, giving us ideas around how we can, bring in more women into the various interventions that we have in our portfolio. Not only for the wider participation of women, but also in Central Bank here. She's done a lot around trying to, mentor a lot of the female staff, and I also want to use this opportunity to commend her for that. So she's going to be talking to us, and it's my pleasure to introduce Ms. Aisha Ahmad, DG FSS. Ms. DG. DG,
thank you very much, Director. Thank you for that very kind introduction. Good morning to everyone. I'm very pleased to be here. Anything that has to do with women pleases me. Yeah. And particularly when it also has to do with money. So pleased to be here this morning. I have a few prepared remarks that I'll do very quickly in 5 minutes or less. I'm very pleased to join you at this virtual event to launch the framework for advancement of women's financial inclusion in Nigeria. The framework was developed by EFINA and Women's World Banking, 2 formidable organizations that have been committed to financial inclusion, and particularly in the later case, women's financial inclusion in partnership with the CBN. I think there's no better time for us to focus on this very important subject than in a pandemic that continues to show itself really negatively impacting women. I also thank our keynote speaker and the Office of the Honorable Ministry of the Ministry of Women Affairs. I talked about the disproportionate impact of the pandemic on women. I think a number of you that have been following this subject would have seen several studies that have shown that, the pandemic, has resulted in job losses, primarily of women, both out of the formal and informal employment and, livelihoods and entrepreneurs. And of course, naturally out of the financial system as well. I think the last report from EFINA says that the female financial inclusion rate was 40.9%. This was in 2018, as compared to 32.5% for men. Now, given some of the stuff I've mentioned around the pandemic, we expect that perhaps this gap may widen. And the reasons for that is not too difficult to fathom. Women play an outsized role as caregivers in the home. They are more likely to be frontline health workers during this pandemic. And because they are also primarily in the informal sector, they are likely to have been affected by the lockdown measures and what that does to livelihoods. Now, these effects we've talked about, the effects of the pandemic on the financial inclusion and the empowerment of women, have emerged in the context of structural challenges that have always existed. And, when I have conversations like this, I always like to remind us of what these structural challenges are. One, there's an existing gender pay gap where women earn slightly less than men. There are cultural barriers, that preclude women from accessing finance, lower education and financial literacy levels, because studies have shown that higher education and higher literacy levels make you more likely to be included in the financial system and more likely to take loans to advance your business. Poverty has been a challenge. You have to have money before you can put it in a bank account. And the cost of financial services remains high, even though it keeps going, it keeps reducing, and the CBN is also doing all it can to reduce this cost. It's still high for some segments of the society. The fact that women are more likely to be involved in rural subsistence farming and the informal nature of that activity, and the fact that they may be more likely to be present in locations where access to financial services is limited. Of course, we are doing something about that as well. We launched the SANEF program in 2018, and this was designed to ensure that we have a proliferation of agents so that even if you don't have formal banks in those locations, women can still access financial services either through wallets or the cash in, cash out services that these agents supply. Part of the challenges includes, and we must admit this, a lack of knowledge from the financial institutions. Serving the women's market has to be more than just coming up with pink labeled products and just calling it a women's program. I think financial institutions have to do better in understanding the unique needs and unique lifestyles of women and how they can tailor financial products to fit that lifestyle and expectation. The lack of collateral and property rights and things like that. So all of these are, structural impediments that have existed even before the pandemic, came with its own negative effects on women and financial inclusion. Now, these challenges I've enumerated, they call for bold, concerted, and collaborative action on the part of all of us, regulators, policymakers, the operators, and other stakeholders sort of in this quest for a more inclusive financial system. We need strategies that will help us change these social attitudes, and it takes a long time to do this, reduce the structural barriers that I've identified, and then economically empower women. So for us at the Central Bank, supporting the development and the launch of this framework is an important step in the right direction, and it seeks to complement our existing initiatives. I think the director might have mentioned some of them. Pardon me if I am repeating them because I came in just in the middle of his talk. And the MSME DF is one fund that we are very proud of because at inception, it was designed to ensure that 60% of the fund, is sort of advanced to women. I think as at last count, 62% of that fund has been advanced to women. 134,000 women, have had access to the MSMEDF fund. We also have women accessing the Agri-SMEs fund, and some of our other real sector support facility, our commercial agricultural credit scheme, the CACs, etc. We continue to find ways to overcome the structural impediments to women accessing sort of these loans, and we've seen an increasing amount. And part of the reason why we've seen that is because we've been tracking, gender disaggregated data, I think, is one of the levers in which financial institutions and policymakers can use to check the efficacy of policies and initiatives and to track, how women are, accessing these opportunities. So I'd like to thank our partners. I've talked about FNA and Women's World Banking for collaborating with us on this very, very important project. I think one other initiative I didn't mention, which I think is really important, is the National Collateral Registry. Because when I talked about the structural barriers, one of it is collateral. There's a certain kind of collateral that is sine qua non in the market. But what the Collateral Registry has sought to do is to accept other forms of collateral that, maybe the traditional institutions might not have properly recognized, and to give it a database and a platform for registering that collateral to make it more usable to support finance. So I'd like to thank our partners and also thank the Special Interest Working Group for all the work, Special Interest Working Group of the Technical Committee, and all the other MDAs and, that work with us, and then the Secretariat itself. I always try to leverage every opportunity to acknowledge the efforts of the partners we work with, because this is a very critical goal that is of national significance that cannot be done by the CBN or the primary regulators alone. It has to be done by all concerned stakeholders. Of course, we remain committed to closing this gap. Now, like I said, advancing women's financial inclusion is a big goal, no doubt, but it can be done like every other big, hairy, audacious goal with a clear vision, with focused implementation of clear action plans and the concerted collaborative effort of everyone. All the formal policymakers, the regulators, the operators, and every other person or institution that is passionate about inclusion. I'd like to encourage everyone to review the framework. So launching the framework is only the beginning. The proof of the pudding is always in the eating. So I expect everyone to focus a lot on the framework itself, look for opportunities therein, see how as organizations and as partners, we can implement these strategic initiatives. And I have every confidence in the future. I know that with all of the initiatives that we are running, with all the support we are getting from the institutions that give us research, that guide policy, I know we will reach this goal for the benefit of the women, their families, the community, and the economy as a whole. So thank you very much for joining us this morning. And I look forward to having a very, very engaging and interesting session. Thank you.
Madam DG, please you help us introduce the minister, please.
Okay. I will do that. I didn't know the minister was on the line. Is she being represented?
Yes, she's being represented by Mrs. Joanne Juma Idonije.
Okay, Princess Joanne. Okay, so I said in my remarks that, I'm very grateful to the Honorable Minister. She's my dear sister. We spoke yesterday. She really wanted to be part of this, but she had an assignment outside Abuja. To be honest, she actually suggested to me that should she cancel the assignment, and I thought that assignment was also equally important. And I said that she should send a representative and would also hold forth for her. So I want to put it formally on record to thank her for all the work she's been doing. She's been engaging us at the CBN to see how we can make some of our initiatives and our projects more accessible to women. I'm very glad that she has sent an able representative in Princess Joan Jumai to represent her today. So you are very warmly welcome, and I invite you to deliver the keynote on behalf of the minister.
Thank you. Thank you so much, DG, FSS, Aisha Ahmed, and all the other speakers who have spoken before me. I also want to say a very good morning to all the panelists and other stakeholders who are online this morning. I want to sincerely apologize on behalf of the Honorable Minister.
It appears we've lost her there, and we can't hear you, ma'am. You are also muted.
She's muted.
You are muted, ma. Can you unmute yourself?
Okay. Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, I'm sorry. This IT technology. Wow. Okay. I was just apologizing on behalf of the Honorable Minister who had planned to be in because of other exigencies of time. So I bring you warm greetings from the Honorable Minister of Women Affairs, Dame Pauline Tallen, OFR KSG. So I'll read her address. I am delighted to be invited to deliver the keynote address at this important historic event of the e-launch of the framework for advancing women inclusion in Nigeria. The COVID-19 pandemic has redefined our rules of engagement, and we have to adhere to it. The Federal Ministry of Women Affairs is responsible for the promotion of the rights of women and children, including women and girls with disabilities. It also works with sectoral ministries, departments, and agencies, as well as civil society and development partners to ensure social justice, accountability, gender equality, and mainstreaming. And this is what informed our establishment of gender the ministries and agencies across the history. I am particularly glad to witness the launch of this document because of the role of the ministry as a member of the National Financial Special Interventions Working Group, which is tasked with the responsibility of proposing recommendations to drive uptake of financial products and youth and persons with disabilities. The implementation of the framework, no doubt, will go a long way in alleviating these issues, and the Ministry of Women Affairs would like to reaffirm its commitment to collaborate with the Central Bank of Nigeria and all other stakeholders towards driving improved access to financial products and services for women in Nigeria. Let me therefore use this opportunity to commend all the stakeholders who have contributed to the development of this framework, particularly at a time like this, where women continue to face inequalities in access to education, healthcare, labor participation, and political representation. The year 2020 is a pivotal year for the accelerated realization of gender equality and the empowerment of all women, and the 25th anniversary of the Fourth World War Conference on Women and the adoption of the 1995 Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action. It also marks a 5-year milestone in the drive to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, Agenda 2030, and the 20th anniversary of the adoption of the United Nations Security Council Resolution 1325 on women, peace, and security. The year also heralds the 30th anniversary of the African Charter of the Rights and Welfare of the Child. It is therefore a fundamental year for the accelerated realization of gender equality, the empowerment of all women and children, especially the girl child. As a nation, it is a time for stock-taking, assessment of the current, the empowerment of women, and its contribution towards the full realization of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. For this reason, the ministry is deliberately engaging a participatory approach that aggregates the concerns and priorities of the Nigerian female populace and children, while ensuring that their human rights concerns, as provided for by global frameworks, are adhered to. We are all currently experiencing the effects of COVID-19 pandemic, which have crippled the supply chain of businesses with their consequences on micro, small, and medium enterprises, where the majority of women's-owned businesses the curve rather than ushered in a period of another pandemic within a pandemic, resulting in increase of reported cases of rape and other gender-based violence, which engulfed the country in the last few months. The situation in some cases resulted in the death of some of the victims, causing outrage amongst concerned individuals. With the restrictions placed on movement, household incomes were negatively impacted, and many developing countries such as ours, where women have greater representation in the informal sector of the economy, risk a slide into food insecurity, poverty, and malnutrition, thereby increasing gender equality. Many women who were the breadwinners in their homes became punching bags as the means of ability to provide for their families were negatively impeded upon. It is no longer news that women and girls are disproportionately and differentially affected by the pandemic, whether as frontline healthcare workers or as victims of increasing levels of gender-based violence amidst the lockdowns. To further, my ministry, in collaboration with the National Association of Chambers of Commerce, Industries, Mines, and Agriculture, and the SME.ng, commissioned a national survey on the impact of COVID-19 on women-led businesses in Nigeria. The report was launched on the 27th of June 2020 to coincide with the UN Micro, Small, and Medium-Sized Enterprises Day. Electronic and hard copies of the report are still available for those who are interested in them. The survey was conducted in 31 states, including the federal capital, and some of the key findings we've had were: 1, vulnerable state of women-owned businesses, limited awareness of government intervention programs, invisibility of women's need in stimulus packages, 98% diminished confidence in business owned and led by women. Digital divide was a huge challenge which made it impossible to work remotely, pressure of domestic and business responsibilities, threat of apathy and hopelessness, among so many others. The United Nations Secretary General, in a speech in April 2020, highlighted the need for urgent action by governments around the world to actively work towards ensuring that the gains in gender equality and human rights over the last couple of years are not erased by the effects of COVID-19 pandemic. Internationally, the United Nations has committed to 5 priorities as part of a long-term post-COVID-19 recovery strategy, which include mitigating gender-based violence, social protection for women and girls, data and coordination mechanisms, including gender perspectives, amongst others. In our efforts to recognize the gender gaps in designing COVID-19 response and recovery programs, we are mindful that women are the driving force behind small businesses and local economies. Going forward, the ministry, in repositioning women's women entrepreneurs to be key players in the economy, he's convinced that any intervention that is committed to turning entrepreneurial ideas into dynamic strategies to create jobs and export opportunities for growth and development must recognize the impact of women leadership for enterprise development, which has a multiplier effect on the family, the society, and country at large. We are retooling many of the existing women economic projects under the purview of the ministry to make them more accessible to the beneficiaries. That is what informed our launch of the Women Development Fund on the 28th of August 2020 in collaboration with some financial institutions, development partners, and other social impact investors in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, including the Central Bank of Nigeria. We are not unmindful that there have been several efforts to improve women's economic empowerment in Nigeria. While efforts remain going, the barriers to access finance for women linger as low income, lack of trust in financial services providers, long distance others, manifest in the financial inclusion gap of 8.4%. It is therefore imperative regulators and other key players take concerted steps to implement policy proposals that address these barriers that keep women financially excluded despite their energy, talent, and resourcefulness. Most importantly, we must all collaborate towards the provision of financial education for women and girls and work to ensure the collection of dissemination of gender disaggregated data for effective planning and evaluation as part of our institutional framework. The ministry, as part of its mandate for advocating for gender equality across all sectors, shall continue to initiate policy guidelines and lead the process of mainstreaming gender at state and national levels. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I am confident that with the diversity of skills, experiences, and competencies present at this launch, this forum will generate new exciting ideas that shall catalyze financial inclusion in Nigeria for women and all citizens. On this note, I want to conclude, but before I conclude, I will appeal to the Central Bank of Nigeria Financial Inclusion Secretariat to please share with us the available funding window opportunities so that we can in turn share with our women in the rural areas. I therefore wish you all a fruitful deliberation, and I thank you for the invitation. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that excellently delivered message from the Honorable Minister. You did it so well and eloquently. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much. Once again, Honorable Minister represented by Princess Joan Jumai. Very apt speech. We would ask that you please send us this particular speech because it really captures our aspirations and we want to translate it more into what we do as well. And thank you also, DG, for such a wonderful speech as well. And articulating a whole lot that we are doing. And my key takeaway from your speech is the taste of the pudding is in the eating. And I hope that we can translate the framework into something that gives our women leaves a very good taste, in their mouths as they go about their businesses and trying to scale their assets to, finance. And Director, to, your speech was really very, insightful and instructive. And we look forward to tapping from your expertise as well in driving financial inclusion. So, ladies and gentlemen, we would like to go on to the very next events. But before that, I would like to remind you to keep an eye on the chat room. The chat room today is your friend. Please go and help us fill out an attendance list, which, a link is on the chat room for you to fill out, please. Basically, moving forward, the next item on the agenda is unveiling of the framework for advancing women's financial inclusion in Nigeria. And here with us today to unveil the framework is no other than Mrs. Amina Omar, Head Financial Inclusion Secretariat. I'd like to invite Haja Amina Omar to unveil the framework for us. Haja.
Thank you very much, Paul. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us for today's event. And we want to acknowledge our stakeholders for their commitment and dedication towards the development of this document. Thank you very much indeed. Before we unveil the framework, we'd like to call on two strategic partners, Athena and the Women's World Banking, to say a few words towards the development of the document. May I call on Mrs. Folashade Agwejule to say just 2 minutes, few words on the journey so far from Athena, please. Mrs. Shola Agwejule.
Okay. Good day, everybody, and thank you for joining us at this e-launch of the Framework for Access to Women's Financial Sector in Nigeria. It's been a very interesting journey for us as Athena. We are also the chair of the Special Intervention Working Group, and this project has come in from a lot of phases, starting with the subcommittee and getting to analyze the issues, and now we're here. And it's interesting to see the passion of the Central Bank of Nigeria towards the execution of this project and all the stakeholders we worked with. You know, during the lockdown, people actually participated fully in the webinars. There were a series of webinars, there were a series of all the stakeholders. It's like we are ready for, you know, everybody sees the access to finance for women as a barrier, as an issue that we all need to tackle. And it's exciting to see all hands on deck towards achieving this framework. Thank you, everybody. And I hope we have a beautiful session today. Thank you.
Thank you, Folashade. May I call on Mr. Ade Ashaye, the Vice President, Women's World Banking, to say a few words, please?
Thank you very much. You know, I'll keep it short. Folashade mentioned the process. I think we spent much of the first few months of the year working collaboratively to produce and fine-tune this framework. The director mentioned the 8 strategic imperatives that came out of the work, but they were based on over 100 barriers to financial inclusions that were identified through this process. So that kind of gives you an idea of the depths that the whole team went to really ensure that what we've produced and what we've created really does hit the nail on the head and really does help address the barriers and really drive the results that we want to drive. You know, low-income women are often the most difficult to reach customers for financial service providers. And we always say that if you solve for the most difficult to reach customers, you create better solutions for everybody. And I hope that this work that we're doing and this work that we're launching today really does help create that enabling environment to really solve for everybody, and especially low-income women. So thank you very much.
We can see the framework being unveiled, although we cannot hear them, but you can see it, you know, in action. So basically, we can give some applause. Can we give some applause for the framework? We cannot hear her basically, but we are in the spirit. We know what she's talking about.
Abigail, Alazu.
Can someone help us with audio at that end, please, Sophie?
Good morning, distinguished participants.
Okay.
So I'll quickly run us through the framework for advancing women's financial inclusion in Nigeria. The framework is available on Central Bank's website, so we can all look at it at our convenience. But I'll just take us through the key contents. Next slide, please. So the framework was conceptualized by the Special Intervention Working Group, which is under Financial Inclusion Governance Structure, which has focus on vulnerable group, including women. And like previous speakers rightly highlighted, EFINA and Women World Banking, in collaboration with other key stakeholders, developed the framework. Now, the framework, which is in line with international best practices, documents the financial inclusion gender gap of 8.5%. And it also highlights benefits of women's financial inclusion. Next slide. The framework highlights the key barriers to women's access to financial services. They are grouped into 4 categories: demand-related, supply-related, regulatory-related, and infrastructure-related. Under demand, we're looking at issues like lack of trust in formal financial service products being hindrance to women in accessing financial products. And they would rather prefer either saving at home or using informal sectors to serve their financial needs. Another important one is cost. Now, cost is applicable to both men and women, but we know women usually are more averse to cost. We have supply related, like the financial service providers who may not bear the cost of reaching the rural and underserved areas where women dominate. We also have regulatory related, and we're looking at issues like policies, guidelines on women's financial inclusion, like products that serve women, and how the wherewithal to enforce such guidelines and policies. We also look at issues like collaborations between key regulatory agencies as part of the hindrances. And under financial and technical infrastructure, we're looking at issues like NIN. NIN is National Identification Number, which hinders ability for women to have access to accounts. We're also looking at connectivity issues and other supporting infrastructure like credit bureaus and collateral registry, which serve the informal sector where women dominate. The framework highlights the 8 strategic imperatives for advancing women's financial inclusion. And now the first strategic imperative is to implement a set of measures to support account opening by women on a large scale and in short term. And now we look at issues of NIN, how women can access NIN more, how to promote account digitization, and how they can include payments, using payments and other financial products rather than cash, and then community referral systems. These are part of the recommendations contained under Strategic Imperative 1. And then in Imperative 2, we have to expand financial and digital literacy capabilities and skills, and then programs for low-income women in the context of specific financial behaviors and products. Now we need to look at literacy, financial literacy for women, and then to develop programs that can educate women. Then Strategic Imperative 3 is to expand delivery channels to serve women customers closer to home. You know, some women are averse to the men serving them in terms of agent network. So we look at how to include women's participation in agent networks and how we can use this channel to reach more women. A strategic imperative 4 is to mandate the development of systems of gender disaggregated data collection to meet the needs of FSPs, that's financial service providers, government and regulatory supervisory authorities. Now we're looking at how to collect gender disaggregated data. We know that this will help to guide the policy decisions and implementation in order to achieve the desired objectives. We look at strategic imperative 5, which is to complete and consolidate the enabling environment required to advance the government financial inclusion agenda, integrating a gender lens. We are looking at the financial ecosystem and infrastructure that support it. We have some recommendations to support this. And then the strategic imperative 6 is to develop financially sustainable products and delivery systems that respond to low-income women's need. These FSPs, that's the financial service providers, they need to understand, among the recommendations, they need to understand the business case for offering products and services to low-income women, and then the MSMEs and the informal sector where women dominate. And they also need to identify opportunities in collaborations between institutions, like in order to serve the rural areas, it may be costly for them, but if they collaborate, they can, in a cost-efficient manner, reach the unserved and underserved areas where women dominate. We're looking at strategic imperative 7, which is to promote at the industry level the expansion of DFS, that's digital financial services and fintech solutions aimed at improving women's financial inclusion. This actually should be a welcome development for targeting women, most of who work at home and work in places like schools. They may not be able to access financial institutions physically. So if we have these avenues, women will be better included in the financial ecosystem. We also, finally, the last one is to build a culture of women's leadership and staffing in financial institutions and other key agencies. This is very, very important. If women are included in leadership roles, better considerations are given to gender-related issues, and women are more encouraged to take up such leadership position. So the next is call to action. We need to step up and implement this framework. The relevant stakeholders, the communications have already started, so we need to be collaborating soon in order to implement the framework to close the gender gap, which presently stands at 8.5%. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Wabuku, for that presentation, which basically is the synopsis of the framework. It is much wider than that. It is much broader. And I urge everyone to get a hand on the framework and read it, internalize it, so that you can help, and be a partner in implementing it. Thank you very much, Mrs. Wabuku. And let's move on to the next item on the agenda, which is the assessment of women's financial inclusion in Nigeria, the EFINA survey report. And to present this is Mrs. Ashley Emmanuel, Acting CEO, Enhancing Financial Innovation and Access, EFINA. She's to do this within 10 minutes while we take on other activities on the agenda. Ashley?
Hello, good morning. Thank you very much. Good, and thank you for the gentle reminder on the time frame. In view of that, I'll rest on existing protocol, but I want to say thank you very much for the opportunity to participate. Congratulations on the launch, and it's really great to see all of the partners that we've been working with for so long on the important objective of women's financial inclusion collectively achieve such a milestone together. So it's a very happy day for us. We're very glad to be here. So just to introduce myself, IFINA is a head of programs at IFINA. IFINA is an organization that promotes financial sector development in Nigeria. And we're working to establish a financial system that reaches all Nigerians. So of course we pay special attention to women who have historically been an underserved group in Nigeria. A few people have already mentioned the importance of gender disaggregated data. And one of the, by looking at historical gender disaggregated data from IFINA's nationwide access to financial services in Nigeria surveys, we were able to observe that the gender gap, as has been mentioned already this morning, in Nigeria is significant, and compared to other countries is actually growing slightly, whereas in many other countries in sub-Saharan Africa, there's been a decrease in the gender gap. So on the next slide, please. In view of this, last year, IFINA partnered with the Financial Inclusion Secretariat with support from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to really do some deep dive research to understand why this was happening and what could be done about it. On the next slide, the methodology here, I won't go through all of this, but basically the research, we used mixed methods approach. So we conducted nationwide survey, including some deeper survey sampling in northern Nigeria and with women. We did some qualitative human-centered design research, and we also conducted research with various experts and stakeholders in Nigeria to understand more. So on the next slide, we found that 3 factors, so we did some very rigorous statistical analysis and tried to analyze certain factors independent of all others. So if you hold everything else equal, what are the core variables that are really driving financial exclusion? And we found that when you ask the question of what's driving exclusion, excluded individuals, meaning those who don't use any formal or informal financial services, 3 primary factors really emerged. One is level of income, second is level of education, and third is level of trust in financial service providers. And this was basically measured by asking respondents, which financial service provider do you trust the most? And those who said they don't trust any providers were grouped into the no category. Those who said they trusted a provider went into yes. And while those 3 factors were significant for both men and for women in Nigeria, we know that women in Nigeria have lower levels of income and education on average than men in Nigeria, which helps to exacerbate this gender gap. We also found that women are less likely than men to report trusting financial service providers, which is important. On the next slide, we also looked at the difference between people who use formal or regulated financial services and those who don't. So those who might use informal services such as a cooperative or Isusu, for example, but don't use a regulated service like a bank account or a microfinance bank. Sorry, can you go 1 slide back, please? Thank you. Yes, this slide. And I think this is a really important finding for us, that when we held everything else equal, women are less likely than men to use formal regulated financial services. And this really tells us that there's something the formal financial in Nigeria is not doing right to reach women, that there's some fundamental issues that we need to understand and address in terms of reaching women with regulated financial services. Because when we add in informal services, we see that gap go away. So it's likely that women are, who are unable to use formal services such as a bank or a microfinance bank or mobile money, are sort of filling that gap with informal services instead. On the next slide, we also saw this gap in terms of access to formal or regulated financial services between urban and rural. We all know that, and this highlights the need for continued work on our agent networks initiatives. Oh, can you hear me? So if you move to the next slide, please. Okay, I'll continue to talk through, and then I think our slides will catch up. With what makes a woman more likely to be financially excluded? And we found that within women, yes, thank you, it's this slide. So if you click down, the first finding was that a woman is more likely to be, Nigerian woman is more likely to be excluded if she lives in the north, if she doesn't own a mobile phone, if she's in either the youngest or oldest age group, or if she's not married. And so if you click down a few more times, we can go to the next slide. Okay, we also did some in-depth research with financially excluded women. Yes, you can go to the next slide. Thanks. Sorry, I put animation in, so it's a bit complicated. We found that financially excluded women tend to face restrictions related to a few things. One is that women are often time poor. And this is not for just excluded women. This is probably true of many women who are with us on the call today. You have work responsibilities, you have family care responsibilities, you have household responsibilities. There are many things that, because of just gender norms, more time burden tends on average to fall to women. Excluded women also are more likely to have restrictions around their physical movement, either because of normative barriers or just because of the patterns of their day-to-day life and their needs to be taking care of the home and children. And then last, excluded women also face restrictions around decision-making, which is important for us as we think about designing solutions to reach them. On the next slide, we found that, however, despite these barriers, financially excluded women are very interested in using financial services. So financially excluded women say that they want to save, and in particular, there's a desire to save in more structured ways to support their children. So that's a key market opportunity for providers to meet. Some women are saying that excluded women want more access to credit, but they can't find options that are relevant for them. Many of them have ambitions around starting a business, for example, but could use some support to be able to do so effectively. And then also when we think about reaching excluded women, it's important to note that they report trusting. We saw that trust is such an important factor in financial access. Women say that they trust religious institutions, they trust their community-based institutions, friends, family, in-person sources as well. So that's really important for us to think about when we think about reaching them. On the next slide, however, one of the challenges is that when we interviewed financial service providers, they say that they don't see a business case in serving excluded women. So we have some work to do around building out bringing new business models into the market, facilitating innovative solutions and partnerships to enable that. On the next slide, there's quite a bit of data here. I won't talk through all of it, but the key takeaway, as has already been mentioned this morning, is that women entered this year more vulnerable than men, and the COVID pandemic, unfortunately, seems to be hitting them harder. So this shows some data from a COVID tracker survey that's being done in Nigeria. We also know that there are risks around, for example, when children are going back to school, there are risks that girls will be less likely to return to school after the pandemic, which will lead to really long-term generational impact. So there's additional urgency there. And then on the next slide, and this is the last piece of data that I'll show, there was some modeling that was done recently using Athena's Access to Financial Services in Nigeria survey data and some other data sources. An organization called World Data Lab did some predictive analysis to forecast what will financial inclusion look like through 2030 if we continue, under similar circumstances with a dip in this graph accounting for COVID. And unfortunately, what this modeling tells us is that if we continue business as usual, the gender gap in finance will be exactly the same. And I think that the takeaway for me is that this event is very important, and there's quite a bit of urgency for us to act now so that when we come back and measure financial access again in 2 years, in 4 years, in 10 years, we don't see this story, that we can see a gender gap that's closed. So on the last slide, I will conclude by saying that, as I mentioned, I'm really happy that we're all convened here today. We really look forward on the Athena side to partnering with everyone here to now that the framework has been put in place, to drive forward with implementation. I opened by saying that in Nigeria, we have a sort of more challenges around our gender gap in financial access than some of our peer countries in sub-Saharan Africa. The good news is that now we are, in many ways, we're half a step ahead of those countries in the sense that we've done the research and now we've put a strong action plan in place to address that gender gap. So I think that we're on the right path, and I really look forward to us partnering to get to the end goal that we're aiming for. And if you just advance down to the final slide, there's a reference to the fact that the full report is available on the website of the CBN as well as Athena's website. I'll put a link in the chat for ease of access. I just went through the findings very quickly, but there's a lot more detail in there. And on the Athena side, we're happy to have any conversation, answer questions or have conversations with stakeholders who want to learn more. So thanks again for having me. I'm very happy to be here, and congratulations again.
Thank you very much, Ashley, for that wonderful presentation. And I believe that, people will have questions on it. And there are even questions already coming in, but we will take that much later on, in the proceeding. But right now, we want to ask participants to fill out a very short survey, 1 minute survey. Sophie, please, is there the link here? Is the link on here?
Yes, sir, I'm putting it now.
Okay.
Dr. Paul, while they're doing that, can I make a comment?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Thank you. I'd like to thank Athena, thank Ashley, representing Athena, for not only for this presentation they just made, but for their commitment, to enabling us policymakers with data, with insights. They continue to be so accommodating and willing to support us. And I thought it was important to put it out there that we are very grateful. Some of the insights that you have gotten from the back testing of the data around, what the typical profile of a financially excluded woman is, I think is very, very significant. I took notes about the fact that they're likely not to have a mobile phone, likely live in the north, are either in the oldest or youngest age group, and usually do not access formal financial services. I think the banks should be very interested in this. Banks and other institutions that are in the formal financial service area, that we're not really attracting the women. We are not the first choice for women, and we need to be conscious about that. So it led me to think that perhaps we may want to take this framework and have other engagements with various groups and get them to tell us what they think the framework means for them. We have strategic initiatives. Different participants or different stakeholders would be able to advance these initiatives and imperatives in different ways. I think we should make this a working document and get those within the sector to tell us what it means for them in terms of action plans. I think it's really, really important. And this launch should just be the first step. I look forward to having a number of engagements, before the end of the year, to get us to translate this into concrete action plans. Because I know it will be different for different people. I just picked out one for the formal financial services, but I'm sure there are others for the CBN and other stakeholders. So I just thought to put that out there, and thank you once more for all the hard work, Efina.
Thank you. Thank you. Very happy to be here.
Thank you very much, Ma. Sophie, what I'm seeing here is the survey. It's not the survey, but registration link. Can you put up the survey link very quickly so that participants can? We have one question for you to fill out and survey, and it's asking you about gender-related policies and practices in your organization. So just as to give us a breather before we move into the next panelist session. We are going to be going into the...
Okay.
Are you there? Can you hear me, Sophie?
Yes, sir, I'm here. So if we could just move to the panel session. The poll
okay,
will
that's
come,
fine.
At some point later.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. All right. So we're going into the panelist session, and they are to discuss efforts to drive women's financial inclusion. And that's going to happen between now and the next 30 minutes. And it's going to be anchored and moderated by Mr. Ade Ashaye, Executive Vice President, Women's World Banking. But before that, I would like to remind us, please, participants, drop your questions on the chat box. We are scanning through and we'll be able to route your question to the appropriate panelists or a presenter, basically on the proceedings that we have had so far. And then after the panelists session 2, you are welcome to drop your questions for any specific panelist. Mr. Ade Ashaye, I invite you to come and introduce the panelists for us. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Dr. Paul. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Also standing on existing protocol. As Dr. Paul said, my name is Ade Ashaye. I am the Executive Vice President for Women's World Banking. Women's World Banking is a global NGO with a focus on driving financial inclusion for women. We specifically work with financial service providers, regulators, and other stakeholders to really drive inclusion for women and low-income women especially. We do this through sort of 3 main areas of our business. The first is the sort of technical assistance and advisory services. Ashley mentioned, I think she said something like FSPs are not doing something right. Now that's the part of our business that really helps the FSPs figure out what that is and fix it. The second piece is the leadership and development, the training. I think the DG mentioned that if you don't have women in those decision-making positions, you don't get the best decisions that are made. So we have an arm of our business that really helps our partners to identify, train and retrain and retain those high-performing women, really to help the career progression into those positions of leadership that we need women in. We need women like the DG in, really to ensure that those right decisions are made, because we've got the right people, all of the right people, and the right mix of people around the table. And then the third arm of our business is we have an asset management arm. I like to call this the put your money where your mouth is part of our business. This is where we actually invest in those institutions that are really focusing on supporting financial inclusion for women. So we have a growing network of over 50 partners, many of which are in Nigeria, 50 FSPs, also in 27 other countries, currently with a reach of 67 million women. So, we're really pleased to be involved in the collation, the work to pull this framework together. So I'd like to again congratulate the CBN and Afina and our partners on today's launch. So the objective today, we have 4 wonderful panelists. The aim of the session is really to start to gain some insight into the ongoing activities of each panelist, targeted at improving access to financial services for women and women's owned businesses in Nigeria. I'll introduce the panelists individually, give them a minute or so, maybe a couple of minutes to introduce their organizations, talk a little bit about the importance of women's financial inclusion for their business, and then I'll ask a question. As Dr. Paul mentioned, the organizers are keeping an eye on the chat box, so please do put your questions to the panelists in the chat box. At the end of this session and after this session, we have a Q&A session, so we'll try and get to all of those questions that you're putting forward to all of our panelists. So right, I'm going to start by introducing our first panelist. That's Amber Hamder. She's the Managing Director of FSDH Merchant Bank and the Chairperson of the Bankers Committee Subcommittee on Economic Development and Gender. Amber Hamder began her banking career at the International Merchant Bank and later moved on to work at Reuters until she joined FSDH in 1993. Her portfolio when she joined FSDH included corporates, as well as managing the Port Harcourt and Abuja regional offices. She rose to become Executive Director and was appointed to the boards of 3 subsidiaries of FSDH. So Amber, if I can hand over to you to introduce yourself, your organization, just tell us in a few short words, your position on the importance of women's financial inclusion in Nigeria.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, Ade, and good afternoon, all participants. Thank you for inviting me here. You can tell from the brief biography of me that Ade read that I work with the Merchant Bank, and for those of you who know anything about banking guidelines, that means that it's not because of my position in FSDH Merchant Bank that I'm here at this conference, because we are not our target market. Our guidelines actually limit our ability to participate in the MSME sector, which we have already identified is where most of the financially excluded women operate. So really my qualification for being on this panel is my role as the current chairperson of the subcommittee of the Bankers Committee on Economic Development, Sustainability, and Gender. And of course, as a woman myself, I'm the mother of 3 adult daughters. I'm very interested in whatever we can do to improve the lot of women in the country. So talking about my position on this question of financial inclusion for women, I think it's critical. Anybody, we Africans, certainly we Nigerians, know that in our part of the world, every bad child belongs to the mother, while good children belong to their father. So women have a, shall I say, a greater interest in ensuring that their children turn out well. And one of those things that they need to do, and they recognize they need to do, is this question of education. And it all boils down to finances. Having finances to support, to add to what the father may be doing, and in the cases when the father can't or won't, to take over the responsibility entirely. Women have a great track record of, when they're given the chance, of repaying loans. And it was interesting to hear everything that Ashley said about what is holding women back now. And I think as collectively, our role is to chip away at all those obstacles and make sure that they can play on a level playing field as everyone else. So that's what I've got to contribute.
Great. Thank you so much. That's absolutely fantastic. And you're right. I think it is this, your role as the chairman of the Bankers Committee that really makes you a very interesting panelist. One of the points that Ashley mentioned was, how vitally important gender disaggregated data is. And we've seen in our work across the world that gender disaggregated data is not standard. It's not normal for most FSPs, and enabling institutions to collect that data is sometimes a challenge. So my question to you, or my initial question to you is, how will the Bankers Committee be able to support improved gender disaggregated data collection?
I think the main thing the Bankers Committee needs to do is actually mandate it. Most of us are using some banking software or the other, and at least from when I realized I was going to be on this panel, I did some research even in my own organization, and I found that the software we use it enables us to do it. The problem is it doesn't mandate us to do it. So, and if you don't collect this information at the point of onboarding the clients, it becomes a little more difficult down the road to try and then find out whether they're women or they're not. So I think the first thing to say is to mandate that this is a required, this information is required at the point of onboarding clients so that we know who is who. And then the other thing is to say that it may be relatively straightforward when you're talking about individuals. We've got to find out how to do this when we're talking about companies, even the small ones, to make sure that, I mean, for the sake of the argument, I would posit that a company is female-led if it is owned, the majority ownership, 51%, anything above 50% belongs to women. So if we don't ask the right questions at the beginning, at the point where we are onboarding clients, we won't be able to disaggregate the information. So the first step will be make sure that it is a requirement to ask those questions at inception going forward. Then the problem will be going backwards with the clients that we already have where this information wasn't captured at the onset. And there's got to be a time frame, a reasonable time frame to go back and, you know, recover, put in that information so that we can then interrogate the data that we have. I think the one thing about the Bankers Committee, though, is that the Bankers Committee only covers banks, only covers the commercial and the merchant banks. Given the sort of those who are financially excluded, we would need to make sure that whatever rules come up in this area, that the central bank will spread it to other financial institutions that are not part of the Bankers Committee, but are supervised by the central bank. So I'm talking about, you know, primary mortgage, I'm talking about the microfinance institutions and so on. So there's a whole range of them, and everybody has to be doing the same thing so that we can then go back and interrogate the data that becomes available. That's my view.
That's great. Thank you so much. You know, when you said it should be mandated, that's music to our ears, certainly. But raising also the point that it needs to be done at the point of onboarding and the difficulties or the challenges when you're looking at SMEs, but also that it's not just for banks, it's for other financial service providers. I think that's fantastic. Okay, moving on to our second panelist. This is Runke Kuye. Runke is the Chief Executive Officer of SANEF, or the Shared Agent Network for Expansion Facilities Limited. Runke is a results-driven banking and financial services professional with 30 years experience, including 24 years in banking. She has vast experience in payment cards and e-business, operations, process transformation, and project management. With her passion for the payment industry, Runke brings her expertise, wealth of knowledge, and all such things to enhance SANEF and boost the financial inclusion landscape of Nigeria. Runke is also a fellow of the Chartered Institute of Bankers in Nigeria. Good morning, Runke. I'll give you a couple of minutes also to introduce SANEF.
Okay, good morning, Ade, and good morning, everyone. I'm so happy to be here today to be part of this advancing women's financial inclusion. SANEF its full name of SANEF is Shared Agent Network Expansion Facility. It was actually set up as a project in 2018, but became a company in 2019 to drive financial inclusion in Nigeria. Our main aim is to increase the number of financial access points, mainly through agent banking, to 500,000 by the end of December 2020. I mean, so far we are at 436,000, 445 actually, as at yesterday. And obviously we intend to meet our target of 500,000 agents. Obviously with 500,000 agents, it is also our responsibility to make sure that women are included at this point. So our main aim really is to have, today I think we have about 25% of them being female agents, but we obviously intend to do much more than that as well as we progress and move forward. I hope to give more insight into this as we go along. Ade, thanks.
Thanks, Runke. You know, you've really gone straight to the point there. We know, we've seen all the data that we've seen, all the research that we've done, it really shows that women are more likely to access financial services from agents of the same gender, particularly women from the same sort of socioeconomic group as the customer. That really builds trust, it builds familiarity, and there's a belief that it ensures sort of privacy and the patience that people really want. So with your sort of current percentage of women agents, so I think you mentioned around 25%, what sort of plans do you have to leverage female agents to better reach women, especially in the rural areas? And can you share a few more of those details?
Yes, thanks. Yes, you're right in the sense that women generally tend to trust other women, especially in money matters, and they also, especially in some areas in Nigeria, they feel more comfortable dealing with fellow women as well. So some of the things that we've done at SANEF, SANEF is an enabling company. So when we do things, we just don't do by ourselves. We actually collaborate with our partners, and our main partners are the super agents as well as the mobile money operators. And then we also work with other outsiders as well to achieve what we need to achieve. So one of the first things we do is that we try to encourage women with existing businesses to go into agent banking. And of course, in doing this, they're going to need some form of soft loans to be able to add that to what they do. So through our super agents, we kind of grant soft loan to them to be able to buy what they require, like point of sale terminals, like devices as well that they need. And we also work with our other partners for support in this to achieve this. Then more focused products are also introduced for women as well to encourage women, not necessarily just the female agents, to even encourage women to be included as well. Then for our financial literacy, we travel around the whole, before COVID anyway, we were traveling around the whole of the geopolitical zones in Nigeria. And in doing that, we engage the female leaders. We engage we also engage the female leaders as well as some of the community leaders as well to see how we can get more female agents, and also for the female agents to encourage women to be financially included. In also doing this, we meet with community leaders in the northern Nigeria to sensitize them about allowing the women to participate in agency banking in order to empower them as well. We also set incentives for the women who join the agency banking platform in the north. We give them as little as cooking pots, aprons for trade, just to sensitize them and to also encourage them to become female agents. We also offer incentives and give targets to those who have become the female agents. For every female they're able to onboard, we give them targets for that as well. Education and training is also very key. So we tend to organize entrepreneurial session for women in rural areas through our super agents. The super agents also include female as their ground staff who go out there to try and reach, especially in northern Nigeria, who try to onboard the agents. So by doing that, you find that the female are more receptive towards becoming agents, SANEF agents as well. And we also feel that it is very, very important to improve the way we use the data so that we can, to separate the females from the male, so we can come up with relevant strategies that we could use to improve inclusion of female in agency banking. So that's basically what we've been doing so far, and what we also plan to do in the future.
Thank you, Rinka. It's really interesting. If you look back at the presentation that Ashley delivered, how many of the things that you're doing sort of resonate with some of the points that she raised, particularly around working with the community leaders, using or working with other females because the trust is there, the training that's required. It's interesting that some of these things we know, almost instinctively we know, we just have to do something about it, and it's really, really pleasing to see that SANEF and yourself have started down that journey. So yeah, congratulations, and we'll be looking to help you do that, to continue with that.
Thank you.
All right, so moving on to the third panelist, Dr. Ijoma Nwagu. Ijoma earned her doctor's and master's in law from Harvard Law School. She's currently a member of faculty at the Lagos Business School, where she played a key role in developing research projects supported by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and as well as the Ford Foundation, and in advancing the role of business in sustainable development through the Lagos Business School Sustainability Center. Jomo, if I can give you a couple of minutes really to talk about LBS and yourself, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Ade, and thank you, everyone, for being part of this wonderful launch and initiative, which is aimed at advancing the framework for women's financial inclusion. So at Lagos Business School, this is a project and a focus, financial inclusion, that is very dear to our hearts, because our institution is founded on that notion of creating shared value, so that we're pushing, developing responsible leaders for the continent who are not just creating economic value, but also social value. So we're very thrilled to be here. And just to tell you a little bit more about the initiative under which we're doing this work. We have a sustainable and inclusive digital financial services project supported by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, whose focus is principally three things. So there's a research focus, a focus on capacity building, as well as evidence-based advocacy. Let me explain a little bit about the research. So we have, for the past 5 years, been following industry in its efforts to create financial inclusion, tracking the latest research and developing the latest research around the state of financial inclusion and the state of women's financial inclusion in the state of market research, and other strands of research that focus on a range of things from policy down right through to gender. So we've been working on that knowledge as a knowledge partner to develop and disseminate the relevant research to underpin our journey towards women's financial inclusion. And on the side of capacity building, we have been working with a range of stakeholders, from financial service providers in the formal sector, diverse providers, as well as policymakers, to kind of learn how to do things differently. It was interesting when Ashley talked about what business as usual could lead us to. So one thing we've been doing is try to unlearn some approaches to our customers and within our businesses, to also our partners in the ecosystem, and also to learn how to develop that business case for financial inclusion for women. So a good part of our work focuses on capacity building, and a good part also focuses on advocacy, because we don't believe in knowledge for knowledge's sake, but actually bringing out that learning, as DG FSS emphasized, taking it out and doing something with it. So we have been actually doing a lot of socialization around the research, and we do on agent networks, for example. So there's a range of that, but underpinning it all is that sense that we believe that women's financial inclusion is necessary for sustainable development, for inclusive development. So on that score of sustainable development, we believe, as Nicholas Kristof said, that women are half of the sky, and we want to take them along if indeed we're going to achieve our targets for financial inclusion. It's got to be based on a foundation of women's empowerment, economic empowerment, that, from what research tells us, that empowerment cascades on to households and families, who are thereby able to achieve their health, educational outcomes, and move out of poverty. And then at the end of the day, we achieve inclusive development. So that is principally who we are at Lagos Business School, and what we do and why we do what we do. Thank you.
That's great. Ijeoma, thank you very much. You talked a lot about research. I know from my time living in Lagos and visiting Lagos Business School, very well known for your research, the research that you do. You know, we've seen there's a lot of talk. You know, we've seen everywhere in, you know, in the media, all these sort of digital financial service providers that are coming through, and we're seeing this almost as a key enabler for financial inclusion. What can you tell us about what you've seen in your research, perhaps regarding the ways in which stakeholders can improve upon their systems and processes to drive greater access to finance for women?
Thank you for that question, Ade. It's a really important one because as we've heard from different quarters today, it is a joint effort and our work has focused principally on enabling formal financial providers play their role in expanding digital financial services or financial services generally, formal financial services, to women, to the poor, and people in rural areas who have been excluded. And one thing and a couple of things, I'd like to share a couple of things that we have learned in terms of the ways in which we can retool ourselves and re-equip ourselves to address some of these challenges. And so the first thing that we have looked at is that need to create an innovative or business model, to have innovative business models that take into account issues like geography, barriers that can be presented even in the social norms that are prevalent in terms of the kind of things a woman can do, and access to and how, you know, women can control and access their money and financial services. So one area that we've been looking at very closely with the policy actors as well as the financial service providers is trying to think about what kind of business models in terms of production of these services and goods and right to their delivery, what model is sustainable and what models are inclusive. So we've been doing a lot of training around human-centered design and women-centered design so that providers can put themselves, empathize and put themselves in the shoe of excluded women, the underbanked, the unbanked, to begin to think about what sorts of design features, what the needs and aspirations of these women are, and now bake those understandings into the kind of products and delivery channels and even marketing of those products that is happening in the marketplace. So there's some interesting examples from across the world. I was reading this report that was talking about the experience in Pakistan, where they were thinking of in the kind of outreach that providers can have towards women. They were thinking of, oh, where do these women feel more safe and feel more feel more safe and relaxed to transact? And they found that in many cases, a lot of these excluded women were comfortable in tailors' shops and able to access those points. And they were now thinking, okay, how can, as a financial service provider, we recreate that comfort in the kind of delivery models that we put out there? So sustainable business models, and we're urging processes and policies that focus also, that open up partnership models, because as I said, it's a joint effort. So FSPs are increasingly, financial service providers are also increasingly thinking about non-traditional partners, from telecommunication companies down to even shops on the ground, retail outlets of diverse types. So we're also looking at understandings there around partnership models, and even within our organizations, how do we innovate? How do we build cross-functional teams that can develop products that are relevant to women? So we have the product on our trainings, we have product development teams working with marketing teams and executive teams. So there are a range of things from technology and data analysis, a range of learnings to do things differently. Because as Einstein said, we cannot solve problems in the same level of consciousness and in the same ways that we've done. It cannot be business as usual.
That's great. Thank you very much. Really love the reference to women-centered design as being fundamental in developing these innovative models to solve the barriers that we're identifying here. And I think that's critically important. Really understanding and being able to put yourself in the shoes of the customers for whom you're trying to develop these solutions. All right, our final panelist. I'm conscious of time. I think we've got about 5 minutes left. Our final panelist is Olawaye Oladoyin. She's an economist and private sector development expert with over 10 years experience working in Nigeria, Canada, and the UK. Oladoyin is currently a component lead at the SEDIN program in GIZ Nigeria, has led several initiatives and programs to support and enhance female participation for the economic growth of Nigeria. Central to her work is the integration and implementation of gender action plans in entrepreneurship initiatives and financial education in Nigeria. Oladoyin, if you could introduce GIZ and yourself, please.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. It's an honor to be here and be a part of the ongoing panel discussion. So yes, GIZ, I'm sure most people know of GIZ, but just putting it out there, GIZ is the German Development Corporation, basically a development corporation that partners with country offices in different worldwide, basically. And GIZ has been in Nigeria for several years. I'm part of the GIZ SEDIN program. So GIZ Nigeria has a number of programs within the country, and the SEDIN program is one of them. The SEDIN program is the Pro-Poor Growth and Promotion of Employment in Nigeria program. And this program is part of the SEDEC, what we call Sustainable Economic Development Cluster of GIZ in Nigeria. So a very big program. We've been in Nigeria, the program since 2017, and this is currently our 4th phase into the program. GIZ has for long been a partner, has for long been part of the Advancing Women Inclusion or the Financial Inclusion Strategy for the country. In 2016, we were part of the Comprehensive Financial Literacy Training Package, developing that and looking to strengthen financial literacy among the economically active population in the country. The training package was really learner-centered, focused, and it also included like a coaching methodology and the education and specific focus on gender, on women, basically. The materials were reviewed and updated in 2019 in close collaboration with the Central Bank of Nigeria and the Financial Literacy Working Group to help align it to national priorities. By 2017, we had already trained about 500 trainers for more than 30 organizations on the financial literacy training package. We also assisted them in institutionalizing this training packages. And right now we have over 100 beneficiaries across the 21 states in Nigeria. But most importantly, a big part of our training package was really centered on the women. About 42 of the women are our beneficiaries. So that's for introduction to GIZ and to the SEDIN program and what we've been doing on financial literacy in particular.
Thank you, Doyin. That's really interesting because you start to mention financial literacy and we haven't talked much about financial literacy. We see it, it's a key pillar for building capacity for low-income women. And I know it's great to hear it's an area GIZ has been focused on for many years. Now, with increased digitization across the board, what are you seeing as the most effective ways to drive improved financial literacy amongst women?
That's a very good question. With increased digitalization, and now that with the global pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, digitalization is becoming more of a necessity than an option. So that obviously is quite relevant. What would we say is the most effective ways to drive improved financial literacy? I think we need to take the discussion one step back to begin with. We know that the barriers that are being faced by women are even going to be more pressing. So women are the hardest hit. We know the gender gap in Nigeria is actually quite wide and is widening. Thank you, Ifina, for that lovely survey. But we need to really consider that if we go with the increased way things are going with digitalization, with the gap can get even more wider. So we need to consider the level of education for women. We need to consider the low income level. Likewise, we need to consider the ways in which they have always traditionally managed finances and look at all of these things together. For the low level of education, we need to talk about digital literacy first. So let's get women to the point where they are digitally literate before we can now get them fully included financially. So this is something that we actually actively promote within GIZ Nigeria and GIZ worldwide. One thing that we do quite well is we have the concept of catching them young. So we run a program which we call the G20 E-Skills for Girls Initiative. It's currently running in a number of countries within Africa. It's an Africa program. We're not fully yet in Nigeria, but we're looking to get into Nigeria. Currently running in Cameroon, Ghana, Mozambique, South Africa, Rwanda. And this is really centered on women and young girls, where we run women-only training on programming or business process outsourcing, so that these young ladies will pick up the skills from quite early on, and this can help turn it into a ripple effect. So addressing digital literacy is the first step to getting them financially included. We also look to work with, currently in Nigeria, we're supporting NGOs and cooperatives within these local communities that are also beginning to digitalize. So we're supporting them with helping them provide the right IT tools to help meet their clients' needs and help them. For instance, there's an NGO that looks to have the Isusu platform, the Isusu savings program into an online platform, and that is currently being piloted. So these are the many things that we're looking to do. I thought my video was on, but just give me a second.
Right, we can see now.
You can see me now, thank you. So these are the many things we aim to do, and currently we also, in the GIZ headquarters, we do have a help desk. We're big on innovative solutions, innovative ideas on how we can help with the advancing of women financial inclusion. A lot of countries pitch their ideas to the help desk, and then these things form into programs that we do look to launch. So obviously the network here, you're most welcome to pitch some ideas to us. We'll be looking to supporting any great ideas coming up from any one of you. So thank you.
That's great. Thank you very much. And thank you especially for the offer for anybody to pitch to GIZ for support in that space. I'm sure you're going to get many people and many organizations coming to you. I think that, emphasizing that the risk that increased digitalization actually could, really push women or increase that gender gap is important, and catching them young and creating a digital first environment. I think that's really useful, very, very interesting to hear. Now, it's been super interesting hearing our four panelists from GIZ, from the LBS, SANEF, and the Bankers Committee, but we've overran our time. I think, Sophie, I'll ask you, we've got is it 5 or 10 minutes for questions and answer? How would you like to manage that?
Hello. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Ade Ashe, for coordinating this session. We are, definitely happy about all the insights we have gotten from the panelists. Wonderful insights. We are combining the questions and answers from the previous session and this session. So we have a number of questions already on the table that we are about to take. First of all, I would like to, there's a question here from Mohammed Jibril. And he says, I am into financial inclusion services providing, financial services providing in the Northwest and Northeastern states from Unified Payments. And from my experiences, women in those areas are mostly not even slightly literate technologically, not even to talk of being agency bankers. Most cannot operate even a non-Android mobile phone or even remember a transactions pin to carry out financial inclusion transactions. What are you planning to minimize, if not eradicate, this issue? I think this question is appropriate for SANEF, Mrs. Ronke Kuye, to answer. Mark, can you please respond to this?
Okay. As I mentioned earlier, and I think as also GIZ mentioned, education is quite key for this to happen. In terms of the number of women that are not literate enough, you would agree with me that most illiterates can even use, or most people who are not literate can use the phone, and to be quite honest, in terms of training them, bringing them on board, we'll digitally train them first, and then we ensure that they have the information, and we'll also have pictorial training for them, and also in their local languages as well, to be able to bring them on board. We are not expecting that 70% of our agents will be female, or even 80%. But I'm quite sure that we will be able to get up to 40% to be able to become agents and who are literate enough to do this and to also understand the digital training that we put them through. And we're also partnering with GIZ for this as well. So I would imagine we should be able to succeed.
Dr. Paul, can I add to Runke's comments there? So,
yes, please. Yes.
This challenge is not unique to Nigeria, not unique to Northern Nigeria. We've seen it across the world, and exactly as Runke has mentioned. Although it may seem that most people perhaps are challenged with using the phone, what you find is if you have the patience, which is what generally women agents or women believe other women agents will have. If you have the patience, if you introduce things like pictorial training, that you are able to move the needle and move the needle significantly. We're seeing this in work that we're doing in Pakistan. It shows that taking the time and having your agents incentivized to take the time to provide the training and explain and then re-explain and build that trust. You really are able to build the needle. So I think the work and the examples that Runke has laid out and the work that GIZ are doing, I think that really is going in the right direction, going down the right path that really will move that needle.
Thank you very much. There's a question here. How do we create those models that we make a business case for women-based or women-exclusive markets? If women are known to be excellent with money management and savings, is that not a key factor? I will call on Mrs. Amber Hamder. I know several of you panelists will be able to have a take on this because you're basically focused on women, but I will call on Mrs. Amber Hamder to answer.
Dr. Paul, could you repeat the question, please?
He says, how do we create those models that will make a business case for women-based or women-exclusive markets? If women are known to be excellent with money management and savings, is that not a key factor?
Well, what I would think it would be one approach would be to create sort of pilot schemes. If we identify we disaggregate our information, we identify women, we have to use some pilot schemes and show people, demonstrate that lending to women can be profitable. I think what the central bank is doing is excellent, where we have specific funds that are targeted towards women, so that in a sense, it's forcing the issue. And if we use the deployment of these funds as the opportunity to create these pilot schemes, to create to bring out those benefits, then by the time the schemes, because you can't, these schemes, intervention schemes, cannot run forever. Even if they run for 10, 20 years, ultimately you have to wind them down. And the whole idea is that for the duration of those schemes, we should build up the evidence, because it was interesting to see in the survey Efina did that the financial services providers were saying that there is no business case. We have to spend the time when we have these intervention programs are on to build those business cases. And I think it will take collaboration between the central bank, as it's doing now, Efina and other partners like GIZ, to create those business cases and have some time for it to come to fruition and show people what can be done when women are empowered. And then that will then create a situation where the banks and other financial services providers see the benefit of tailoring their systems, working with people to provide the education to make sure that we can target this as a sector, as a viable sector. The important thing is that it's got to be commercial. If you look at it as something that is going to require intervention in perpetuity and is not commercially viable, it will not be sustainable. That's my view.
Thank you very much. I would like to say, Mr. Adeb, take a question from Mr. Adebisi Ajayi, who is asking, please, when are you going to start the Catching Them Young Females in Nigeria? When are you going to do the Catching Them Young Females in Nigeria? And I want to direct this question to a panelist, Mrs. Oladoyin Olawaye of the component lead GIZ. I would also like a take from Dr. Ijoma Wagu after Mrs. Oladoyin.
Okay. Thank you very much for the question. So basically, as I said, it's a GIZ Africa-wide program, currently in a number of countries, but not yet in Nigeria. And the reason why is that we work with the country's priorities. So we work with both state and federal partners to come up with concepts that would help develop the program. We just don't come in and launch programs here, but it has to be something that is actually demand-driven. So that's why I said you're open to pitching ideas. Obviously, we can share the experiences from these other countries, the learning, lessons learned, and all experiences would be shared, but we need to develop our own concepts. And this is why we work with partners to help just get this implemented. And particularly now with the COVID-19 pandemic, there have been really great ideas that have been pitched that are currently being piloted in these few countries. And we're looking for the results of that, which we would willingly share with any partner that would be interested.
Thank you very much. Dr. Ijoma may wish to respond as well.
Thank you for those responses and the questions. What I would like to say when it comes to the business model question is that there are three factors, intersecting areas that need to converge if we're going to have, success, create, on a sustainable basis, financial inclusion for women. And we've talked about commercial and market viability. So these products, there must be a business case, and I'm happy that efforts are ongoing to actually build out pilots that we can learn from, and also the CBN is also providing interventions to support commercial and market viability. So the other aspect of it is feasibility. feasibility in terms of the processes and systems operating within our financial service providers, that looking inwards to question, do I have a focus on gender? Am I aware, am I using my gender disaggregated data to make sense of the products that I'm rolling out and how I'm rolling out these products using human-centered design or women-centered design to know the customer better and to also understand the data so that the data is informing that feasibility. And a key part of feasibility that we sometimes lose sight of is also that aspect of women in leadership within our financial institutions that could have introduced that perspective on women's needs and aspirations, be more sensitive to that, because a key part of why we're not able to establish the business cases that we're not getting a lot of our product development teams are not gender aware or constituted in a way that includes women's voices. And the third part of the puzzle of getting a business case on board is that idea of customer centricity, women centricity. Are these products and services we are seeking to create to advance women's financial inclusion desirable? And this is where a lot of our providers are trying, and now we're now pushing them, through the research we share, through the trainings we provide, to kind of push them towards that desirability element, so that we're not from a top-down approach pushing products, pushing services out there, but actually building those up bottom up from the experiences and aspirations of women, because the reality is that until women can see financial products and services as for them, right, it's not going to happen. So these three things must converge: viability, feasibility, as well as customer desirability, for us to kind of have sustainable business models that deliver our aspirations for women's economic empowerment and sustainable development for all.
Thank you very much. The next question is from Nneka. We know that women are more difficult to reach through the usual channels that target men. How is this being tackled, and what channels have you identified? I will invite Mr. Ade Ashaye to route this to the appropriate, to moderate this.
I'm sorry, Paul, Dr. Paul, could you just re-ask the question?
We know that women are more difficult to reach through the usual channels that target men. How is this being tackled, and what channels have you identified?
This is the question. This is one of the things that Hamder mentioned about I think making sure that you've got the right people around the table. This is a question we deal with every single day at Women's World Banking. But rather than hearing from me, I think Amber, if I pass that one over to you and give your take on that question. Mrs. Amber Hamder, is she still on the line?
Sorry, I didn't realize I was muted. Okay, the question was about reaching women, since they don't use the same channels, they can't be reached through the same channels as men. I think we have to follow the research that we've done. Athena has done some research, and they've told us that there's certain people that women believe in. So let's believe the research and go there. I mean, as it's going to be a long process. So if we start there, reaching them where we know they are. If we start by reaching them where we know they are, then from that first group, we will then get to the next group. So they've talked about the people that they value. So why don't we go into neighborhoods and go to the religious authorities? And so if we go somewhere, let's talk to the churches and the mosques as a first step. And these are the organizations anyway that are working closely with these women in terms of the challenges they have in their families. And when we know that there's also a focus for women on their children. So another way that we can reach them out is perhaps through the schools their children go to. So I think that for me, that would be the obvious way to go. Efina has done some research, they spent a lot of money, invested a lot of time. Let's use the information that they got from that research. That's what I would say.
And that is exactly, thank you very much. That's exactly the point of, and why I was so excited to hear, I think as Ijoma mentioned, women-centered design. If you put yourself in the shoes of the customer for whom you are trying to solve, then you start to pull out these answers. So thank you very much. It's exactly that. Over to you, Dr. Paul.
There's another question here, sir. My name is Antonia Oli, representing Women for Women International NGO. How do we address bank charges from microfinance banks and BVN related issues as we look at more inclusiveness for women?
I think I'll see Dr. Paul if there's someone from the CBN who can answer that or respond to that. But before I do, I would just like to raise a point. And it's been raised a couple of times, but it's one of those points that people can potentially miss. If these solutions are not financially viable, they're not sustainable. So they have to be financially viable. So looking at the fees and the charges separately to the financial viability of the entire solution is dangerous. But yeah, Dr. Paul, if there's somebody from your team who may have a view on that.
We've run out of time for this session, actually. And there are many questions that are being asked, and some are being forwarded on YouTube, some on WhatsApp, and on this platform here. So what we're going to do is to collate all of this and respond via email to everyone. If you asked a question, please do us a favor. I think we should have your contact. We will respond via email to everyone on these questions. So thank you very much, Mr. Adeashaye, Executive Vice President, Women World Banking, for coming along and for doing a wonderful job of moderating this event, sir. And all the panelists, we thank you a lot.
May I make a comment?
Yes, ma'am.
I had asked to make a comment, but I don't think you were told. Sorry to interrupt you. Just very quickly, I just thought it was important to share. I was listening, want to demonstrate I was listening. I think the suggestions that were given in terms of legislating or making it mandatory for gender disaggregated data. I know that the banks, deposit money banks, provide returns on sustainability indices to the central bank. And thus, I'm surprised that it appears that it is not formalized. So I'm going to go back and look at that template again and ensure that that template enables financial institutions to get sort of comprehensive data across all the products. So once you come in, actually it should be something you should have. And I think they do have that. Perhaps we're not asking for it. There's a lot of conversation about the business case. I hear the story about the business case. I'm not sure if financial institutions are looking at taking a broad view of their portfolios. What I mean by that is that, for instance, women can predominantly be found on the savings side. They are a source of stable deposits, long-term deposits that are a source of funding for some of these corporate loans that are being given. And so we have to have sort of a broader view of the entire portfolio to say we have different customers, different niches, and they play different parts in the balance sheet and the income statement. Of course, banks would rather have stable, long-term, low-cost funding that you can see in savings than have corporate, debt to fund those transactions, because the margins that they make, of course, are lower. Women are also the primary decision makers when it comes to household finances. So when you're looking at the women's market, you can't just be looking at what you see in her account. You have to find what she's responsible for directing and see that she's sort of a core client in that respect. there was a question that someone asked around the North and literacy, digital literacy, and the challenge with that. I think there was a question like that. I see this whole digital thing as an opportunity, particularly for the North. Part of the challenges we have with certain women is that sometimes they don't even have access to go, even when there's a financial institution near them, they need permission to go out. Now, one thing that digital finance, digital financial services will do is give them that ability to connect with the platform right from their homes, you know, and for those of them that also work from home by producing things they sell from home, the fact that we have a widening market for sales and things like that online should be an opportunity. So where the whole conversation about infrastructure, critical infrastructure comes in, can tie into all of those. So perhaps we should start changing the way we are trying to advance this literacy and focusing more on how we can leverage what technology can give us to deliver on that. And then non-interest banking products and general knowledge. So we are putting out all these products, but I'm not sure how many people are aware. And I will confess that perhaps we've taken awareness as a one-off thing. It has to be continuous, and we have to keep measuring how we're doing with different platforms and how people respond to those platforms. And so we should do more of that. I want to thank all the panelists. Lagos Business School as well has been very helpful. They brought to our attention this issue around the agent pricing. And based on that, we did some work around deregulating, I think it was cash-in. I think it's cash-in or cash-out. We deregulated one of those, and that was because of their research. We've partnered with GIZ. SANEF, of course, is part of us. You know, we are on this road together to get to 500,000 agents. It hasn't been easy. You know, I commend the MD for all the work she's done, because despite the pandemic, we look like we're on course to meet the target. And FSDH continues to be a model for an institution that is walking its talk. I think it was on Women's Day this year that I saw an article about the women of FSDH. Women's World Banking, Mr. Adi Ashaye, it's good to see you. It's an organization I'm very familiar with. In my past life, we did a lot of work for them. They remain one of the brightest, strongest voices for women's financial inclusion, you know, and they're seeking to do this across the world. So kudos to you. Well done. I hope I've called everybody. Thank you very much from my side. I just wanted you to know that sort of I've been here listening, and I'll take back all the suggestions. Thank you, Paul, for the opportunity, and thank you all.
Thank you, Ma. Thank you very much, Ma. We're now going to go to the next session, which is implementation roadmap. A very brief, highlight of what we're going to do to implement the framework, and that's to be taken by Sophia Abu, Financial Inclusion Secretariat. Sophie.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you everyone for joining the meeting. I'm going to very quickly run through the slides that I have here. I'm just trying to share it. If you give me 1 second, I'll figure that out and I'll be with you. Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to just run very quickly because I know that we've run out of time. When the DJ was speaking at the beginning, she had alluded to the fact that this is a brilliant document that has been worked on by all the stakeholders and all the partners, but it would be really sad if the document just went to sit on shelves and gather dust. And so we're looking already to the future and how we're going to implement the document. So I will just move to the next slide to just give us a general idea of what we are already planning. So we have high-level strategic high-level implementation roadmap for the imperatives that have been developed. And I'm not going to dwell on this slide. This is sort of like an outline for how we're going to start to engage with each and every one of you. Don't be tired, because we're going to come to you a lot. Moving very quickly. So we've identified the model that we want to use to sort of drive the implementation of this framework. We're looking at something called a community of practice model. And what this means is just a group of stakeholders with common interests to come together, have think tanks, as it were, have discussions, and to be able to come up with an innovation or idea. The very last point there says the communities shall deliberate and present one innovation of the quarter to the Financial Inclusion Governing Committee for approval. And what that starts to look like is, for strategic imperative 1, for instance, we would have a number of institutions who are responsible directly or indirectly for the implementation of that imperative. And so we would come together, engage, come up with one idea per quarter, and see how we can start to develop work plans to implement that idea. Moving next to the next slide, this is just a general idea of the work streams and what I just said previously. So the COPs will come together, come up with an idea. Your idea would sort of have to show what we call a theory of change, where it leads directly to the implementation of the targets, which will be set also by this group. And so this is what that idea of the quarter starts to look like. Each group will identify a series of projects to drive the achievement of the special KPIs, or specific KPIs, and decide on one per quarter to implement. The selected IOQ shall aim to address a specific barrier to women's financial inclusion with a focus on excluded, vulnerable women, particularly in rural areas. The COPs shall establish the theory of change for the selected IOQ, linking the project to direct impact on women's financial inclusion. And each IOQ shall be implemented as a quasi-project with timelines and deliverables, set targets to achieve the targets at the end of the project's lifespan. So this is just running quickly through some of the memberships that we're looking at, and this is not cast in stone. We are looking to have these institutions in these COPs, and we'll be coming to you as time goes on. If there are any institutions who are looking to join any of these COPs, our email addresses are available. Please indicate interest and we'll reach out to you and add you to the group. So this is just an idea, of the institutions that would be on each of the COPs. And then lastly, this just shows exactly what the next steps are. We've developed a terms of reference. We're still finalizing that TOR for the COP members. And this is really just a guiding document for every institution who would be a member of the COP to understand what their roles and responsibilities are. We'll convene inaugural meetings. And what we're looking at is there's a Financial Inclusion Week that's coming up in October. And the idea is to sort of have a virtual engagement, the initial engagement with the COPs, to start to see how we can develop the work plans for each strategic imperatives around the recommendations in the framework as it is now. And finally, once an IOQ has been selected by the group per quarter, and again, it should be implementable. So we're looking at things that we want to have some kind of impact with. So projects around numbers, projects around how we can improve financial literacy for 1,000 women in the Northeast, those kinds of things. And then we'll start to develop strategies around how to implement the IOQ. I think that is the final slide from me. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sophie. We are moving on to the next item on the agenda, which is closing remarks from Dr. Eme Dada, the SA to the Deputy Governor of Financial System Stability. Dr. Dada, please.
Thank you very much, Dr. Paul. Thank you. I'm really honored to deliver the closing remarks for what has been a very successful and remarkable launch of the framework for advancing women's financial inclusion in Nigeria. You will agree with me that today has been a very engaging day. There was no dull moment. Our time has been well spent. We had some very thought-provoking remarks by the Deputy Governor of the Central Bank of Nigeria, Mrs. Aisha Ahmad, that helped set the tone for today's event. We had the keynote address from the Honorable Minister, Women Affairs, ably represented, the remarks by the Director of Development Finance of the Central Bank of Nigeria. We had the e-launch of the framework, the presentations, the panel discussions, the technical sessions have all been very stimulating and have pointed to the urgency to close the gender financial inclusion gap in Nigeria, particularly now with the adverse effects of the pandemic, not just in an end in itself, but to also stimulate economic recovery. On behalf of the Central Bank of Nigeria, I'd like to say a very big thank you to all our guests, the participants, our invitees, the panelists, our partners, stakeholders, and everyone who has contributed in one way or the other to the success of this project and this event. Again, I say thank you, and I urge us to remain passionate about our commitment to push for progress in gender-based financing. On that note, I wish us good success in our endeavors, and I say happy independence in advance to every Nigerian and to the friends of Nigeria. On that note, thank you very much, and God bless you all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Dada, for that very apt closing remark. And on behalf of the Head Financial Inclusion Secretariat, Mrs. Omar, and the Financial Inclusion Secretariat, and the Director, Development Finance Department, Mr. Yula, and every other person, and then also thanking the DG who has been patiently here with us and has listened through everything. We appreciate you, Ma, and the Executive Vice President, Women World Banking, Mr. Adeashe. Thank you for taking the time. Everybody who has come and participants, without you, we would not have done this. God bless you all. And on behalf of the Central Bank of Nigeria and the financial inclusion stakeholders, I say thank you for attending and have a wonderful day. God bless.
Thank you all. Well done. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.